A former Red returning to Cincinnati. And no, we're not talking about Sonny Gray. Not yet, at least. This time, it's Chris Valaika returning as the Reds' new hitting coach. Welcome in, everybody, to a special edition of Chatterbox Reds. I'm Craig Sandlin, joined, as always, by Nick Kirby. Nick, how we feeling today?
Feeling good. Was recording another podcast when I get off and see the news that the Reds have made a hire for a new hitting coach, director of hitting. So sounds like a slight promotion from what Chris Valaika was doing in Cleveland. But yeah, the Reds news, Craig, fast and furious. World Series hasn't even started yet. It feels like there's new Reds news every other day.
Hey, it's that time of year and an exciting time to be a Reds fan for sure. You mentioned it, Chris Valaika, officially the director of hitting, matches a similar title to what we see from Derek Johnson, who's the director of pitching, oversees the pitching program basically throughout the minors and the entire organization. So imagine it's a little bit similar to that. Chris Valaika's Guardians knocked out of the playoffs recently by the New York Yankees, which kind of explains the delay in announcing this hire. But Nick, what's your initial reaction to Chris Valaika as your new director of hitting for the Cincinnati Reds?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, this was a guy that I think was pretty, decently coveted. Obviously, I think the Cleveland was fairly happy with Valaika. You kind of look at their roster. I mean, they had a 100 WRC plus, which is right at average. But when you kind of look at the names and especially the age of the Cleveland Guardians players, you have to feel like he did pretty well in his time in Cleveland. Obviously was hired by Terry Francona, so has that familiarity. And anytime you're able to, poach a coach that's coveted from another team, a playoff team, I mean, I think overall it's a good thing. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of just shows the Terry Francona effect and what he can bring, and hopefully, Craig, my biggest takeaway right now is hopefully this is the first of several types of these moves where you can get coaches that you wouldn't be able to get without Terry Francona.
Yeah, and we talked about the potential of free agency being impacted by the hiring of Terry Francona, but certainly this seems like a step in the right direction as well. You mentioned it, but just as a brief overview, Chris Valaika had a 4-year playing career. He played with the Cincinnati Reds from 2010 to 2011, was a Cincinnati Reds draft pick back in 2006, also had stints with the Miami Marlins and Chicago Cubs. Took a coaching role with the Cubs in 2021 and has been with the Guardians since 2022 as their hitting coach. So, as you mentioned, a nice coup for the Reds. I thought this stat was interesting. Since Chris Valaika took over as the hitting coach for the Cleveland Guardians, Cleveland has boasted the lowest K rate in the MLB. So I know that that's a stat that I'm sure a lot of Cincinnati fans will be looking for. And Nick, there's been debate about the impact of hitting coaches and pitching coaches and what they really bring to an organization. What's your opinion on the value of these assistant coaching roles as it pertains to a club like Cincinnati, who quite frankly has a lot of young hitters who struggled this past season?
I mean, it's so hard to quantify that type of thing. I think you have to look at it more of like an individual thing. I think like a hitting coach could really impact one player in particular and maybe not have a whole lot of impact on the rest of the roster if the hitting coach finds, one little thing that they can help correct. I know a guy like Donnie Eckler, when the Reds had him, he was credited with a couple players, figuring something out and helping them along the way. Holistically, is it going to change a whole lot? I don't think so. The thing I would, look at with the Guardians is Reds did have a higher walk rate as an offense than the Guardians had. It was very small percentage, 0.4, but it's not like they were drawing a ton more walks or anything like that. They were striking out less. 4% is a pretty sizable gap in terms of your strikeout rate. But Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's just it's clearly a guy that Francona is comfortable with, and I think that in itself is probably as meaningful as anything for Francona to have a guy that he knows that he can lean on right away, because there is going to be a lot of unfamiliarity around. We expect Derek Johnson's going to be back. Francona's never worked with Derek Johnson. There's a whole host of other, you know, personnel throughout the entire Reds organization that Francona has no has no knowledge, and they never worked together. They have that no working relationship. So for Francona to have one guy that man, I know exactly what Valaika is going to bring. Valaika knows exactly my expectations, you know, all that kind of thing. I think that just kind of helps Francona ease into this transition that I think at times, Craig, we probably undersell, you know, how difficult it could be to go into an entirely new organization and learn. You know, think about like in our personal lives that we've started new jobs, you know, there's just so many things that you have to learn, and it's not really any different in baseball. And so I think that familiarity aspect to me probably means as much as anything.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for the culture. I mean, we've talked a lot about the culture that Terry Francona is going to have to build with the Cincinnati Reds team. It was a big point of emphasis when they made the decision to move away from David Bell about the culture and accountability and all of these pieces. And so having someone alongside him who understands his expectations and can hold those players to the same level of expectations, I'm sure will go a long way. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't know if I missed this or if you have insight into this, but I don't think the Reds have formally hired a bench coach yet. I don't know if they've made a formal announcement around Freddie Benavidez. I know there were conversations when Terry Francona first got hired about Brad Mills potentially joining the staff. Brad Mills previously served as Francona's bench coach and is highly respected in the coaching realms. You know, interesting to see if this is the only move that Terry Francona goes with a familiar face, or if there will be other faces that we're going to be bringing into the Reds coaching tree that Terry Francona has other ties with as well. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I would imagine there's going to be some other guys that Francona brings in. You know, at this point, um, there's probably a lot of guys that are eyeing for different positions, and so you know, if you're wanting to bring in a bench coach, or is the guy that Francona wants also maybe going to have a better opportunity in another role that he's waiting to see if he's in the midst of interviewing for. And I think there's so many dominoes that kind of have to fall into place. You know, as far as that, but you know, just kind of reading through some of, you know, Chris Valaika, you know, there's a lot of articles, and it's easy to have all these articles in fairness when a team's winning and playing well and overachieving. But there's a lot of articles about how, you know, the Guardians and their hitting approach is credited to Chris Valaika and all the great work that he's doing there. So he certainly has a good reputation there. Again, I don't want to go too overboard in terms of like the impact and what it means. But you know, look, it's certainly nice to have someone that a team did, you know, admire and wanted to retain.
Yeah. And it's worth noting, of course, that there were reports over the last several days that the Guardians fully intended to bring back their entire coaching staff. So this wasn't a move where Chris Valaika was trying to preempt something else that was coming. It was strictly he either wanted to be reunited with Terry, or he believed in what the Reds are doing, or like we mentioned before, the director of hitting title was attractive to him. I don't think this was him trying to escape anything going on in Cleveland. So, Nick, any other final thoughts to leave the podcast with today regarding this one specifically?
No, just I mean, Valaika, you know, for those who might not remember, Valaika played in 19 games for your 2010 Cincinnati Reds, National League Central Division champions. So let's run it back, Chris, huh?
Let's run it back. I'll also mention that Chris Valaika, full circle moment here, back in 2012, played for manager David Bell in the minor leagues. So we're keeping the ties close for sure. But again, if you are just joining by any means, Reds name Chris Valaika, director of hitting and major league hitting coach. Valaika, the last 3 seasons in Cleveland, and prior to that, assistant major league hitting coach with the Chicago Cubs. He joins Terry Francona on the Cincinnati staff as they attempt to return to the playoffs next season. For Nick Kirby, I'm Craig Sandlin. As always, this has been Chatterbox Reds.
We also want to remind you that you can call or text 988 anytime, day or night. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is a place to get support for anything related to mental health. Whether it's an immediate crisis, simply wanting to find out how to connect with care, or anything in between, it's a 100% confidential, secure, and anonymous way to reach out for help when you don't know where else to turn. To connect, call or text 988 or visit mantherapy.org to get help. It's okay not to be okay.